Hi everyone, it's Mrs McInnes here. Welcome to lesson 6 in our series of lessons on simultaneous equations, which is actually the last lesson in this block. So in this lesson we're going to be really just concentrating on some past paper questions, so exam style questions, looking at various things that we have learned throughout this topic. So the first past paper question we have here, we have Charlie is making costumes for a school show. One day he made 2 cloaks and 3 dresses. The total amount of material used was 9.6 square metres. So part A of this question is to write down an equation that illustrates that information. Part B, we have the following day Charlie made 3 cloaks and 4 dresses. The total amount of material used was 13.3 square metres. Again, write down an equation to illustrate this information. And then part C, we have calculate the amount of material required to make 1 cloak and the amount of material required to make 1 dress. And this question is a total of 6 marks. Okay, so this past paper question is actually from the 2016 past paper, if anybody is wanting to note that down. And it's from paper 1, and in that paper it was question 4. Just if anybody wants to note that down into their notes. So let's go through this question one part at a time. So part A was to write down an equation to illustrate the information just given above. Okay, so we've got 2 cloaks and 3 dresses, and the total amount of material for that was 9.6 square metres. So this is your simultaneous equation in a context, okay? So the first thing I was getting you to do in the previous lesson was to assign a letter to your variables. So I'm just going to go for a C and a D for these, okay? So I'm just going to write up the top here that a cloak is letter C and a dress is letter D. It's always helpful to do that just so that you remember what each letter is standing for. So this equation would be really simple. All we would write is 2C plus 3D is equal to 9.6. We don't need the units here because we're just building an equation. Okay, part B, we have a similar situation where we have 3 cloaks and 4 dresses, and our total amount of material here is 13.3 square metres. So again, we're going to write down an equation to illustrate that. So we would have 3C plus 4D equals 13.3. So part C is really the main part of this question, where we are being asked to find the amount of material for 1 cloak and 1 dress. So we're basically being asked to solve that for a value for C and a value for D. Okay, so our 2 equations, what we could do is we could just number these up here. So that would be equation 1 and that one there would be equation 2. That's the 2 equations that we're solving simultaneously. So we need to decide which variable we're going to eliminate here, and I'm actually going to go for the letter C's. I'm going to make them both 6, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write my 2 equations just one above the other down here. So 9.6, that was equation 1, and equation 2, we had 3C plus 4D equals 13.3. That was equation 2. So I'm going to multiply my top equation by 3 and my bottom equation by 2 to make both the C terms into a 6. So my top equation times 3, we're going to have 6C plus 9D, and that's going to be equal to 28.8. And then the bottom one times 2, we're going to have 6C plus 8D, and that's going to be equal to 26.6. So I'm going to number these now, number 3 and number 4. Okay, so now we have our equations with a matching term, the 6C in both. So that's the term I'm going to eliminate. So I'm just going to draw a little square around that. So we are going to be subtracting these because we have a positive 6C in both equations. So it's same sign, subtract. So we're going to be subtracting these. So 3 minus 4. So our 6C minus 6C, well, that's disappeared. 9D minus 8D, well, that's just a single letter D. And then 28.8 minus 26.6, that will leave you with 2.2. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and substitute that into equation 1. So substitute D equals 2.2 into equation number 1. So equation number 1 was 2c plus 3d is equal to 9.6. So we're going to swap the d for 2.2. So we're going to have 2c plus 3 times 2.2 equals 9.6. So that's going to give us 2c plus 6.6 equals 9.6. And then we're going to be subtracting 6.6 from each side. So minus 6.6 from both sides. So we're going to have 2c equals 3, and then we'll divide both sides by 2. So c is going to be equal to 1.5. Okay, the last part of this would be to answer the question in context. Okay, so we were asked for the amount of material required for 1 cloak and 1 dress. So we would write cloak is going to be 1.5 square meters. So I'm just going to write that as meters with the wee squared. And then a dress was going to be 2.2 square meters. So meters squared. Okay, now I think it's quite useful for you guys here to see where the marks are awarded. This is a 6-mark question, so there's quite a lot of marks here available. So I'm going to mark on here where your individual marks go. So you get 1 mark for each of the equations that you build. So 1 mark for this first bit for part A and 1 mark for this equation in part B. You then get your next mark for what we call scaling the equations. So when you do this multiply by 3, multiply by 2 to make these both 6, okay, that's called scaling, and you get a mark for doing that correctly. Okay. You would then get your next mark for having 2 answers. So for having an answer for both of these values, for D and for C, you get 1 mark. Now, whether they're both correct or not, as long as you have a value for both, you get your next mark, and then your next mark would be if they're both correct. Okay, so 1 mark is for having 2 values, and 1 mark is for them both being the correct values. Okay, your last mark would be for answering the question in the context, so using the meters squared in your answers. Okay, so that would be your 6 marks. All right, so the second past paper question we have is this one here, which is more of a kind of graphical representation of your simultaneous equations. If anybody is interested, this question is from 2017, and it is in paper 1, and it's question 13, just if anybody's interested where that question comes from. So here we have a graph that shows 2 straight lines, and you're given the equation of each straight line. So you've got 3x minus y equals 2, and you've got x plus 3y equals 19. And they're both labelled on the picture for you there, so you know which one is which. So you're told the lines intersect at point P, and you're asked to find algebraically the coordinate of P. Okay, so even though you've been given a graph here, you are not being asked to draw anything out. You're being asked to solve this question algebraically, so it's important that you read the question and look for any kind of keywords that are going to direct you in how you're going to approach the question. So we have our 2 equations, 3x minus y equals 2 and x plus 3y equals 19. So really the diagram is just there as a visual representation, but the part that you're going to be looking at really is this part here with your 2 equations. So these are both laid out in the way that we need to go ahead and solve this using the elimination method. Okay, you could rearrange both equations into y equals and then use the substitution method, y equals y. But the more common method for solving these types of questions is your elimination method. So that's what I'm going to use here. It's the most kind of straightforward method for solving this question. So our 2 equations, I'm just going to write these underneath here. So we've got 3x minus y equals 2, so that's equation 1. And you have x plus 3y equals 19, and that's equation 2. Okay, now in this question here, we could just multiply one equation to match the other, okay? So you could multiply your top equation by 3, and that would make the y's both a 3y. Or you could multiply the second equation by 3, and that would make the x's into both 3x and 3x. So it's really up to you what you prefer to do. I'm going to go ahead and go for eliminating the y terms. So I'm going to multiply my top equation by 3 to make that a 3y to match the one below. So equation 1 times 3, that's going to now say 9x minus 3y equals 6. So that's going to be equation 3. Okay, so what you can do now is you can really just look at these two equations here. So equation 2 and equation 3. So the letter that I'm eliminating here is my y term. So I'll just do a wee box around that. Now here we actually have a plus 3y and a minus 3y. So we have different signs. So if we have different signs, we're going to add the equations together. So it's going to be equation 2 plus equation 3. So we have x plus 9x, so that's 10x. The 3y plus the minus 3y, that's gone, that's eliminated. And then we have 19 plus 6, which is 25. Okay, if we divide both sides by 10, we'll get x equals 2.5. And then we're going to go ahead and substitute that in to equation 1. So substitute x equals 2.5 into equation number 1. So equation number 1 was 3x minus y. So 3x minus y equals 2. So we're saying that x is 2.5. So 3 times 2.5 minus y equals 2. So 3 times 2.5, that's 7.5 minus y equals 2. I'm going to just move up to here for space. So 7.5, I'm just going to write this out again up here for space. 7.5 minus y equals 2. So we would subtract 7.5 from each side. So that's going to now give us in our next line minus y equals, and then 2 minus 7.5 would give you minus 5.5. Now because these are both negative, we can rewrite that as both positive, so y equals 5.5. Okay, the question asked for the coordinate of point P, so you would just need to finish that off by writing this as a coordinate. So if x is 2.5, that's your first coordinate there, y is 5.5. Okay, so if the question asks for a coordinate, you must write your two values as a coordinate. Okay, so again, I'm going to show you where the marks go for this question. So it's a 3-mark question. So your first mark is for the scaling. So when you multiply one of your equations to match the other one, and you do that correctly, that would be your first mark. And then similar to in the last question, your second mark is for having two values. Okay, whether they're right or not, 2 values gets you your second mark, and then both values being correct would be your third mark there. Okay, so it's useful for you guys just to know where your marks are coming from. So what we'd like to do for today's lesson is in the Unit 4 booklet, we're going to be looking at page 14, and then these are the questions that I've selected here for you. So we've got question 1, 3, 5, 8, 9 and 14. Okay, so those are the questions I would like you to try. They're all past paper questions. As usual, I'll be on the live call on the Teams page if you have any questions or you want any kind of pointers how to start anything, and you can email me photos of your work as well if you want me to check through your working and just have a look at what you've been doing. All right, okay, thanks very much for listening again, guys, and I will speak to you on the Teams page. Bye.